All right, if my computer is correct, this should be working. So hopefully people are watching. Um, if you joined me last time, thank you for coming in last time. If you don't know any clue who I am, my name is Mark Benson. I live in Oak Park, and I do this thing for NASA where they give a really generous large title for it called a Solar System Ambassador. And that's just a very fancy way of saying NASA tells me things, and then I relay them to schools or public events or online things like this when we're not allowed to be at public events. So that is me. And the person on the other side of the screen is Michelle Nichols from the Adler Planetarium. She is the director of public observing at the Adler. And we're going to be talking to her tonight about observing in the night sky, which you can see even from places like Chicago, which are light polluted. So we're going to talk about all that stuff. And hello, Michelle. How are you?
Hello, I'm doing great, Mark. How are you?
Good. Thanks for coming on.
Sure.
You'll see on the side of your screen, there's questions and comments that'll roll. I'm sure you can see those right too, Michelle, right? Okay, good.
Yep.
So as we're going, if questions pop up there that you want to grab, go for it, grab them. Otherwise, I'll try to flag them. So we're going to let her do a little, I gave you her title, but I'm going to let her do a little introduction of what that all means, what she does at the Adler, maybe how you got into all this stuff, stuff you studied in school. I'm sure we always get asked questions about what do you have to study to get a job like yours or to do work like yours. So tell us about you.
Sure. All right. So my title is Director of Public Observing. So I'm in charge of all of the Adler Planetarium's telescope and sky observing initiatives. So if you've heard of Scopes in the City, or our observatory called the Doan Observatory, or anything else that we do where we get people to look up at the daytime or nighttime sky and enjoy that. So that's what I do. I've been at the Adler it'll be 25 years in June. So yeah, it's been a long time. I was just talking with a bunch of school kids from Gatlinburg, Tennessee this afternoon.
I love Gatlinburg.
Yeah, and so we would pass through there on our way to Asheville, North Carolina when I was a kid going on vacation. And so I was talking with some of them today about the solar system, and one of the kids asked, how in the world do you get a job like yours? So that question comes up a lot. But
I actually still ask myself that. I usually ask that once a week or so. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. How in the world did I get here?
How did that happen? Yeah.
And it basically started when I was 4, and we went to see a little movie that you might have heard of called Star Wars, and saw it in the theater. Death Star exploded. Everybody cheered. I still remember that. I hope that's not a spoiler for anyone. You should have seen it sometime in the last 40-some years.
You're safe. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And it kind of happened from there. I saw this space stuff on the big movie screen, and it was intriguing. And it just kind of blossomed from there. My mom was into, or still is into, Star Trek, the original series.
Yeah.
So started watching those. And when I was almost turning 8, a little TV show called Cosmos was on PBS.
The original.
The original, yeah.
Not the new brand.
Yeah. And I really got interested in it from there. Didn't understand everything he was saying. I was 7 or 8 years old. But my parents realized I was really interested in this, and so we started going to the Adler Planetarium. So I'm originally from Minooka, which is a town a little bit west of Joliet. And so we became members of the Adler for several years. We would go see every single show, and we go to the members events, and I remember the members holiday party and stuff like that. So, I got a subscription to Astronomy Magazine in the 80s, and I went to space camp a couple times.
For kids watching, a magazine is a tablet that doesn't do anything when you touch the pictures. That's what it is.
So, right. You have to actually physically move the paper yourself.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But what got me interested in Space Camp was another magazine that some of your audience might remember, called National Geographic World. And it was specifically for kids. And I vividly remember one of the covers of cover images was a kid at Space Camp in front of a kind of a computer console kind of thing, wearing a headset like this, and it was sort of dark and red and just kind of blue, and it just looked really cool. And there was an article inside about Space Camp, which had started, it began not too long before then. And so I wanted to go, and I got a chance to go when I was in high school a couple times.
Wow.
And majored in physics and astronomy in college at the University of Illinois. But I even knew at that point that I didn't want to do astronomy research. That just didn't sound interesting to me at that time. And so I started, thanks to one of my professors. He said, "Hey, there's a planetarium over at the local community college. You may want to go check it out. Sometimes they let students work there."
Yeah.
And so I started volunteering there. So I volunteered there for a couple summers at the Starkle Planetarium at Parkland College in Champaign.
Okay.
And as I'm doing things there, giving live planetarium shows and various other things, I realized this is what I want to do. This is pretty cool. I get to interact with people. I get to teach them about space stuff. Get to help put some shows together. And that, I thought this was just the end all be all of what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And so it was neat to have that realization. And I figured out the planetarium is the greatest place on planet Earth to learn public speaking, because it's in the dark. And so no one can see you. They can just hear you. So they can't see how terrified you are.
That's true.
And so, but I still was able to interact with people. Even in the dark, you could hear people's reactions. They could answer your questions and all that kind of stuff. And so graduated with a bachelor's degree in physics and astronomy, and applied for an internship at the Adler. I interviewed for it, and I didn't get it. And I told the students today, I said, this is your one life lesson two life lessons that I'm going to give you. That the first thing is, if you ever have an interview, send a thank you letter. And so I sent a thank you note and thanked everybody. If anything ever comes up again, let me know. They called me a couple weeks later and said there was a temporary position opening up. Would I like that? And I said, sure, I'd love to interview for it. And so I interviewed for that one and got it. And that was a 6.5 month position, and that kind of got extended, and that next one got extended, and 25 years later, I'm still there. So I also have a master's degree in education. So did that while I was...
They probably have public speaking courses as a part of that master's. Maybe.
No, not really.
No.
That particular program was for people who were already out in the working world, who want to go into education as a career.
Right.
So I shouldn't say it wasn't part of it. If they did have a class, I didn't have to take it.
Okay.
So it was really cool to have the ability to go to school and work at the same time. Right. So yeah, it was pretty neat. And so about 3 years ago, I became the director of public observing. And if you like the title that I have, fantastic. If you don't like it, that's okay. I made it up myself.
Ooh, see, there's the tip. Get yourself a job where you get to make your own title.
Make up your own title, yeah. Everybody kept asking me, so what do you want this job to be titled? I said, I have no idea. So
see, I want to be thought leader. I want a thought leader to be on a business card. I don't have a job where anyone will let me do that.
There was a person that I worked with at another museum. She and I did some workshops at a couple conferences, and she was able to come up with her own title as well. And she literally got on her business cards, Queen of All I Survey. So nice. Yeah, she one-upped me on that one. I don't think I'll be able to top that one.
Yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. So it's interesting you brought up that stuff fiction like Star Wars led you into the real stuff like Cosmos, because that's kind of the same. I think that's the same for me, and I feel like that's the same for a lot of people. That
Mm-hmm.
the fiction, that an interest in the fiction in reading Contact, or I guess a decade or so later seeing the movie Contact, or
Right.
Close Encounters, or depending on which decade you were a kid watching movies, if it was some younger kids now, maybe it was watching The Martian
Yeah.
in theaters or reading the book before it. That would have been something that made someone decide, I kind of want to know what the real part is now. What is real and what is not? Where does that lead? So that's interesting that you mentioned that, because I think that's the same for a lot of people. The fiction leads to the nonfiction.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned it, I went, oh, that's right. Close Encounters of the Third Kind was one of my favorite movies when I was a kid. Watched it many, many times.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Isaac Asimov's books, especially the Robot series and the Foundation series. I still read those books about once every year or two. I'll start my way through the books and read my way through them again. I've read them dozens of times, but I never get tired of it.
Yeah. Good. So that makes sense. I love in my free time I write fiction for kids. Mm-hmm. Just a thing I do as a hobby. So I like the idea that fiction will lead people to that interest. So
it crosses over too. I mean, there's books out there about what's the reality, what parts of Star Wars or Star Trek, especially
bridge
what
books
parts are real and what parts are not quite so real, that you can just gloss over and just let it go.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned the Adler in terms of where you normally are during the day. Mm-hmm. Obviously, that is not where you are these days.
Nope.
The picture on there I just threw on the screen here is the Dome Observatory. I put it on there. I was going to put a picture of the entire planetarium, but everyone knows what the entire planetarium looks like because it's right in front. The dome is in the back, and a lot of people don't know that it's back there. Right. So I didn't mention I volunteer at the Adler, and I get to help show people telescopes. And I found out that they had a volunteer program because I actually went to look for what the dome's hours were, so I could go see it. And then I saw a little thing about being a volunteer, but I don't think I knew where it was. I think I thought, well, is it in the back? Is it where is it connected? So that is the Dome Observatory. Next time it's open, wander around back, and hopefully it'll be open there. But what is the Adler up to right now?
Well, I'll talk about that, and then I'll mention the Dome Observatory, because there's probably a lot of people who don't even realize there's an observatory back there. I'm like, wait, there's an observatory in the middle of Chicago. So the Adler is currently, so we're taping this on April 8th of 2020. The Adler is currently closed for the so we can do our part to help keep people safe from the COVID-19 pandemic. Closing, no gathering place there. Have people be safe and do our part for social distancing. And so the staff, we're all working from home, and we have been interacting with folks digitally as much as possible, our social media feeds. Mm-hmm. About a week ago, we also did a live telescope viewing to YouTube. We have a YouTube channel. And so I hooked up a telescope in my front yard and hooked up a camera to that and sent the images to my laptop and broadcast my laptop to the Adler's YouTube page. And if you would have asked me about a month ago if I would have known how to do that, I would have said absolutely not. So this is giving us a lot of opportunity actually to find new ways to interact with folks, and also hopefully continue that into the future. After all this is over and we're all able to be together with each other again, we still want to hopefully do programs like that too. So this is not just a one-time thing. We're going to do more of these.
Yeah.
And the observatory plays a part in this as well. Of course, we can't be there. We can't go inside. But in January, we installed a new telescope in the observatory. So actually, I should back up. Some folks may get confused between the word planetarium and observatory.
Sure.
So the planetarium, basically, it's a word that can describe three things. It could mean the machine that projects the stars, the planets, and what have you up onto a big dome.
Yeah.
It could also mean the big dome, the big domed room that you have all that in. It could also mean the building that the big domed room sits in, the machine sits in. So we kind of use the one word three interchangeable ways. But the big domed building, the dome on the top of the Adler Planetarium, has never opened. It does not have a telescope in it. That is one of our, or inside that dome is one of our main theaters. Right. We have two in total. The observatory was built, it opened in 1977. So it was built in 76, 77. And it opened with a telescope that was built at the Adler Planetarium. We used to have a mirror making lab, a telescope mirror making lab. And so they made the mirror of that telescope in 1961. They knew even then that they wanted to build an observatory someday. Right. And so the Adler was approached by the Doane, it's spelled Doane, the Doane family in the mid 70s, who wanted to do something to remember their parents, Ralph and Lillian Doane. Coincidentally, so Ralph is from the Chicago area. Lillian was from my hometown of Minooka, Illinois. And I had no idea till a few years ago that was the case. Anyway, so they wanted to remember their parents who had passed away a few years earlier. And the Adler said, hey, we have a great project. We thought we were going to put a telescope on top of the building, on top of the roof, on the flat part of the roof. But, structurally not quite going to work out all that well. How about we build a building? So they built the building and put that telescope in. We replaced that telescope in 1987 with a larger one, and we replaced it with an even larger one in January. So it is sitting there waiting for us to come back. It is very patient. It's under
no one has used it except staff getting it set up and trying to get it all established.
Yeah, we literally have not used it yet because it's not fully set up yet. So we still have work to do. We were in the middle of all that when we had to close down. So we still have a few more months worth of work by the time we come back. So, but that's okay. It'll be there waiting for us.
Okay. So that's a rather large telescope. Obviously, it's if I remember right, the new one is a 24-inch
correct
telescope. The old one was a 20-inch. The primary one was a 20-inch. That's a little bit larger than most people are going to have at home. So it might feel like to some people in their backyard that it's cheating to have such a big telescope. It's not fair what you're able to see there versus what they might be able to see when they're stuck at home, because people are stuck at home, where we just tease them about this great new telescope, then say you can't come to see it right now. Can't see it yet. So if you're at home and you have a more regular telescope, lots of people, when I'm at the Adler volunteering or when I'm doing events around Oak Park, the assumption that people have is it's Chicago or the near suburbs. It's too bright. You can look at the moon. Sure, you can see the moon. The assumption is always, well, you can see the moon, but that's probably just about it. What else are you really going to see from around here? So why don't you tell us what, I think you're going to blow that idea out of the water. So why don't you tell us what you can see from your back porch with even an amateur backyard telescope, something, we say inches, that's the diameter of the telescope. So, which basically determines how much light is going to be collected. It's kind of like a funnel sort of for light. So the bigger the funnel, the more light, a 4-inch telescope might be what a beginner might have. Even maybe even a little smaller. A 6-inch might be if you're really getting into it a little bit more. Or a pair of astro binoculars can do quite well looking through deep space things. So if someone has a telescope in their house, maybe they know how to use it, maybe they don't, and they're not sure what to point it at, what should you point it at in Chicago?
Sure. So we actually should probably back up a little bit, because some people ask, I don't even know what to get. What
Right.
size should I get? And I see a question is up on the
What size?
chat board. What size? What size should I get? So the the size, as Mark mentioned, the size of a telescope is usually determined by the size of the main light collecting thing, a lens or a mirror.
Yeah.
And so the telescope currently in the Dome Observatory has a main mirror that is 24 inches across. That's big. There's only a handful of amateurs that are going to have a telescope that big. And so, but on the flip side, on the other end of the spectrum, you truly, first of all, just need your eyeballs. Then a pair of binoculars actually can do pretty darn well, even if,
Yeah.
and if they're image stabilizing binoculars, that's even better. But a telescope that is, as Mark said, a 4-inch telescope, meaning the main mirror or lens is about 4 inches across. That's pretty darn decent for seeing a variety of things in the Chicago area. We take our telescopes for Scopes in the City out, and our telescopes are 6 inches across.
Mhm.
And so the main mirror is about that big.
Yep.
And the variety of things you can see is pretty amazing. You can see, of course, craters on the moon. You can
Right.
see when Jupiter's out. You can see the 4 largest moons of Jupiter. When Saturn is out, you can see the rings of Saturn. You can see some of Saturn's, or at least one of Saturn's largest moons. So there's the picture. Mark, you took that when?
I took that last fall, I think, sometime
Okay.
last fall.
All right. So
And that is a cell phone held up to the eyepiece of my telescope in Oak Park, where I have an apartment building behind me that has lights on all day and night. My neighbor's house had lights on them. It wasn't like some magical place that I went to take that picture. That was my porch. My lights were on in my house, and I had my cell phone, and I think that was my 6-inch telescope at that point.
yeah. No one gets tired of looking at the moon.
Nope.
It is such a cool thing to look at, and the rings of Saturn, moons of Jupiter, Mars will appear as a little tiny reddish disk. You can see, if you know where to point your telescope, that's a whole other topic, but if you know
Yes.
where to point your
We'll get to
telescope,
that a little bit.
yeah, we can get to that. You can see the gas and dust cloud called the Orion Nebula.
Yeah.
Side note, in astronomy, we love confusing you, so we throw in other languages words, and the word nebula is Latin, which no one speaks Latin really anymore. But the word nebula means cloud, and it basically was a fuzzy thing. And they
Right.
saw fuzzy things in the sky, and they called every single fuzzy thing they saw a nebula. Doesn't mean they are all the same thing. It's just they were all fuzzy.
Sure.
And so the nebula in Orion is the fuzzy thing in the direction of the constellation Orion, which you can see in the picture right there from the Earth Sky website, which I love that website. Yeah. But the Orion Nebula is, if you take a look at Orion, he looks like a bow tie. In the middle of the bow tie is Orion's belt.
Yep.
And if you see the star called Rigel, if you draw the line downward, so let's see if I can do this. You've got the star Rigel, the one downward. There we go. That one is called Safe. And so if you look at the 3 stars, I'm going to go this way, the 3 stars of Orion's belt, kind of in between Safe and that lowest belt star, a little bit
almost a
off to the
kneecap.
side. Yeah, it's kind of Orion's kneecap. Yeah,
it's kind of a kneecap.
There's a fuzzy thing there, and that is the Orion Nebula, the fuzzy cloud in the direction of the constellation Orion. This particular cloud is where stars are forming, and potentially solar systems are forming around some of those stars. Yeah. We've seen some of the building blocks of solar systems forming around some of those stars, which is pretty cool. And but you can see that I truly saw the Orion Nebula with a 6-inch telescope sitting on the back deck patio area of the Modern Art Museum in Chicago.
Yeah.
Looking toward the lake. That is possibly the most light polluted spot in Chicago.
Right.
And I pointed my telescope. I knew where to point it. I could see the Orion Nebula through the telescope even from there.
Right.
So not hopeless at all. Well, you can
Right.
see double stars. You can see all sorts of stuff. And so the next key is then how do you find that stuff? And so
Right.
we're gonna talk about that. But
We get into that. Yeah. With
yeah,
Orion, so I know some of you heard the description, and she described it, finding it exactly the way I would describe finding the nebula. But some of you probably watching, if you're not used to using telescopes, might say, okay, so you're telling me it's pretty good viewing in Chicago that you wouldn't expect. Now you're telling me to point to a vacant spot in the middle of the sky between the belt and a foot. I'm just going to start pointing at nothing. How do I do that? Well, we'll talk about apps that'll help you find things but with the nebula specifically, even in this area, you're going to see it. They're more faint than Rigel, certainly, and more faint than Betelgeuse, even now that even when it was dimming. But if you look in that gap, if you say, all right, I'm going to look toward Orion's kneecap, they said to look kind of around there. If you turn off your porch light so you're not getting glare and look in that area, you will see. I mean, if you're in a really, really dark area, you'll just see it. But if you're just even around here, you will see a couple little stars. You'll see a couple little twinkles faint in that area. Point the telescope or your binoculars at those. So there's something for you to point at. To point at the lights you are seeing in the kneecap area, and you will move around a little, and it's in there. So it's not actually, you don't have to point at something you can't see. You can actually point at the little mini cluster of stars that you'll see through your natural eye.
And that's another good thing to point out. If you're brand new to astronomy, you don't know anything. I get asked this a lot. What should I get for a beginner telescope? And I say, forget the beginner telescope. The first thing you need to get is a good app for your phone.
Yep.
The second thing you need to get is a book called 365 Starry Nights by an author by the name of Chet, C-H-E-T, Chet Raymo, R-A-Y-M-O. I had this book when I was a kid. They just re-released it a couple years ago, updated it. It is fantastic. It will give you something to look at literally every night of the year. You turn it to today's page or this week's page, and it'll say, all right, we need you to, you're going to go find Orion tonight or something like that. And that's the thing that they'll want you to learn. And then next week, maybe the 15th of April, go out and start to look for this other thing and get to know the sky. A telescope will not make it any easier to see the sky. In fact, it'll make it a little harder, because the bigger the telescope you look through, the smaller the piece of sky is that you're looking at. And you're already up the creek if you're finding dim stuff. And so you need to then even know where the really dim stuff is. And if you're just hunting around and searching, that can be kind of hard. Learn the sky first. Get a good app, get a book, and get a pair of binoculars, and start to learn those constellations and those bright stars and other things. And the greatest thing is, we live in a light polluted area. I tell people all the time, learn your bright stars in a light polluted area, because you don't have all the dim ones confusing you.
That's true. And you mentioned Gatlinburg, Tennessee came up earlier. You're talking about, I go there once a year and I stay in this cabin in the mountains. And with a bunch of writer friends. Krista's watching. She's one of the writer friends who goes. So she can attest to the amount of time that I spend on the porch with my telescope when I go down there. And the first time I did that, I thought, this is going to be the best. This is going to be so great. It's a darker sky. It's not polluted. It's not Chicago. It's not perfect, because it is still a city with a lot of bright lights, but it's going to be so much better. This is going to be great. And I went out on the porch and I start pointing. Gene goes too. And I point out there and I'm like, all right, so I'm going to point my telescope right at, I'm not used to having so many choices.
What's that?
Yeah. There usually aren't that many choices. I'm pointing at the bright thing. That's Jupiter.
Right.
I've only got like 8 things to choose from. Any one of them is probably good. Half of them might be planets, during the summer. So that's pretty good. But you get confused by all the stars, and it's
Right.
great to see all of them. I'm glad I get to see all of them, but it is confusing. And binoculars, we're not telling you to use binoculars just out of the idea that it's a beginner thing, like, oh, but you're not ready for a telescope, get some binoculars. I have a very large telescope, and Michelle has a very large telescope, and we use them for wonderful things to look at some very tough things to find sometimes. But I also have a pair of binoculars, and I use those binoculars a lot because there are certain things you don't want to look at through a telescope, or at least not the kind that you probably have in your backyard. Things like the Pleiades, the Seven Sisters. If I look at that through my telescope, I'm too magnified. It's too powerful. It doesn't really do much for me.
Yeah,
But if I look at those through my binoculars, it's brilliant. It's bright and sparkles, and you know at the moment you see it, and it's distinct. You've got a nice wide view. So it's not just, oh, you're not ready for a telescope, use binoculars. Binoculars are better for a lot of things.
Yeah, the great thing about binoculars is that, number one, the view is right side up. For a telescope, the view is going to be upside down. That's just how the optics of a telescope work. If you have a telescope and you're going, this thing doesn't work right, everything's upside down and backwards, trust me, it's working right. There are certain telescopes called spotting scopes or birding scopes that have an extra light element in there that will reflip the image right side up.
Yeah.
But for astronomical telescopes, you want as few optical elements to interfere with your light gathering ability as possible. So you don't we don't need the view to be right side up for astronomical telescopes. If the moon's upside down, turn your moon map upside down. Big deal.
Yeah.
But that can be confusing to a lot of people. So learn your sky a little bit, and you have the view right side up through your binoculars and go, oh, there's the Pleiades. Oh, I can tell that's in the direction of the fuzzy Orion Nebula. Mm-hmm. You can get a sense of how far that is from one star versus another. You can start to see, depending on the magnification of your binoculars, you can start to see some moons of Jupiter and other things. You can start to split some double stars. There's things you absolutely can do with binoculars, and some stuff, as Mark mentioned, that does not look good through a telescope. I will never point a 24-inch or even a 6-inch telescope at the Pleiades, the Seven Sisters, even though there are something like 500 or more stars in that cluster.
Yeah,
it just won't look good through a big telescope.
Yeah. So the image I threw on here, we're talking about finding things in the sky. So I don't know if this is one you still use. This is called, there are a lot of apps out there that you can use to find the night sky, find things in the night sky. I like to pretend that I can go out and just look up and be like, oh, yeah, that's Venus right there. Or yeah, no, I know that's Sirius. That's Sirius right there. Sometimes during the seasons I can do that because you kind of have the same basic star patterns for a large chunk of one season. You get used to them being up there, and then the seasons change and they kind of rotate around. But I use an app to help me find particular things. I use it all the time, even just to tell when something's up. Like, all right, well, I'm pretty sure I can find this if I go out at the right time, but I don't even know when it comes up. Did it set already? So the app I put up there on the screen, and there's a million like it. This one's Sky Safari. This is one I use, and I use it because Michelle told me to use it a while ago. She recommended it. Basically, I looked at her, I said, what do you use? And she said she uses that. So, but there are a lot of them. You don't have to use that. A lot of their interfaces, they look the same. It's the same sky. So, so that's one of them. Do you still use that one, or do you have other ones you recommend?
Absolutely.
That you like?
Yeah. I almost exclusively use Sky Safari, except on my work laptop. I have the desktop planetarium program called Starry Night, and so I like Starry Night for my laptop. I like Sky Safari for my phone. Just that's my preference. There are a lot of free apps out there, and I caution people, maybe think about getting one of the 4-pay apps, because a lot of the free ones, they're either going to have limited abilities, or you're going to have to pay to unlock certain features. So you're going to end
Sure.
up paying anyway. You might as well pay
Right.
up front and get what you want. And
Right.
so Sky Safari has a few different levels. The screenshot here is Sky Safari Pro,
Okay.
but I think the Pro just basically means it has a lot more information. The
Sure.
features are mostly the same.
If
But
you
if
want to
you,
look up and identify something in your night sky,
yeah, exactly.
that's the basic feature of what these apps do. If you want to do search and locate, if you want to find the ISS, the space station, if you want to give you history or look ahead in time, and that might be different. But if you're just like, what is that star right there?
Yeah,
Pull
that's
out
the
your
dirty.
phone. The basic version is going to give you that.
Mark, correct me if I'm wrong. The dirty little secret of all of us amateur astronomers is when somebody asks us, what's that bright thing up there? Sometimes we'll know it, and sometimes we don't. And what do we do when we don't know it? We pull out the
Pull out
app
our phone.
and we point it up at the sky and go,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, that's what
We
that is.
don't have to identify and name things like Galileo. We just have to look at what they've already found. So
Right.
it's a lot easier that way. But
Exactly
yes,
right.
so a phone app is not cheating. Like why would
No,
you
it is not.
why
It'll save
what
you
do
a
you
lot of
if you
aggravation.
want to send someone a message, do you run across town and deliver it or do you call them? It's not cheating to use technology. There's no and sure maybe you can only see 35 or 40 bright spots when you're in Chicago on a clear night, but honestly that's more than I'm going to memorize. And the skies change seasonally. If I'm used to looking at one part of the sky in the winter and saying, well, that's Sirius right there. I memorize that now. Well, 7 months later, the sky completely changes. You got different stuff in your sky. And then 5 months after that, you're back to Sirius being up at the same spot at the same time. I'm not going to remember that was Sirius. I'm just not going to. I'm going to forget. I'm going to go, oh, I know that one. What is that one? And I'm going to pull out my phone and I'm going to look up real quick. And then I'm going to tell my daughter, hey, do you want to know what that is? That's Sirius.
And parents,
And
it's a
she's
great
not
way
going
to
to
stay
know that
ahead
I
of your
looked it up.
kids. Yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of kids, if you're teaching your kids this stuff at home and you're using a telescope and you want to get them interested in it, I don't know if your kids are anything like people watching. I don't know if your kids are like my daughter, but any other kid, I think if I'm having trouble with the telescope and I can't find what I'm looking for and I'm just kind of skating around trying to find something to look at, I've lost her interest. She's gone. She's going to go do something else. So pull out your phone, find the object, and observe it.
And
Just
even
do it
better,
quickly.
when they get old enough, start to have them learn the app.
Yeah.
Maybe they can plan your observing night.
Yeah.
And even if you don't have a telescope, you don't need one.
No.
Plan the observing night. What are the things you want to look for? And then you might have to pivot because, oops, we live in the northern Illinois area, and look, there's a cloud in that direction. So we got to look for something else.
Yeah.
Plan the everything everybody's going to have to wear because it's going to be 45 degrees out and you need to bring hot chocolate and
Yeah.
and do all that stuff. And we got to get the chaise lounge out because we got to get our feet up off the ground or else our feet are going to be cold, or
Yeah.
and all that stuff. And that's where it got really fun for me, because when I was a kid, my parents got me a telescope, and the very first thing I ever saw through it was Saturn, and I still remember that. And every Saturday night we would, in the summertime, we would throw Saturday Night Live reruns on because it was summer, so they had it was the reruns, and get the telescope out, and we would stay up till 11 midnight, whatever, pop some popcorn, and go out and enjoy the sky. And
it was Saturday Night Live for you.
It was Saturday, literally.
That
Saturday
one's for
Night Live.
that one. I don't know if your coworker Adriana is watching, but that one's for her if she happens to be watching. Saturday Night. She's the lone person who will appreciate that. So that's for her.
And this was the Eddie Murphy era of Saturday Night Live. So
it was good. Yeah.
It was very good. Yes.
Yeah.
But if you want to take a look at the picture that you've got up there on the screen, take a look at the date. That's in a couple weeks. Actually,
it is. That's the future.
Yes. If you go out right now, or sorry, not right now because it's cloudy out right now.
Yeah.
I'm looking out the window.
I'm looking out my window too.
Yeah, it's cloudy. But in the morning, so that is set for a little before 5 in the morning. So we've got Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars in the low in the southeast sky in the morning right now for the next several weeks. And so get out there and if you happen to be up, go find those. But the app will be able to help you tell which one's which.
Yeah. Yeah. And then right now, if you're looking right now, tonight, if it happened to be clear, or if someone's watching somewhere where it is clear, you're going to get, in this relative area, you're going to get the moon, which was just full yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
So I suppose is just not full, which would be a waning gibbous. Is that the correct term? There we go.
Very good.
Very fancy term.
The name gibbous, it's another Latin word, I think. It means humpbacked. So it basically,
to me, it means more than half.
More than half, less than full. Yes.
Yeah, more than half, less than full. It's a crescent, and then it's half, and then it's gibbous. And waning means it's going away. So it's full, and then it's waning and going away. Waxing
getting
is
smaller.
The
yep.
other, and I never remember why the word is waxing. So I just remember that it's not waning. That's the only way I remember that. I know what waning means. I don't know why waxing means.
Wax off.
Wax on. Okay, so there you go. Wax on, wane off. There you go.
Yeah, wane off. There you go.
Yeah. So you see the moon. What else would you get right now? We had Orion up there. That would be kind of low southwest.
Southwest.
At this point, once it's dark.
Mm-hmm.
So.
But that really bright thing in about halfway up in the western sky right now is Venus. So if everybody's been wondering what that really bright thing has been for the last few months, that is the planet Venus. It's, I believe, just past. So Venus goes through phases like our moon does. Yep. So it's just past half Venus, like third quarter Venus, and heading toward crescent. So if you have a pair of binoculars over the next month, you'll be able to see Venus go toward that crescent phase, and a pair of binoculars is perfect for seeing that. But
Venus is fun to look at because you're not really going to get detail. You're not going to see detail like if you have if you're looking at a telescope, you'll see moons around Jupiter, and you'll maybe see it looks like it's wearing a striped shirt, which are clouds. That's kind of what it looks like through a lot of telescopes. It looks like Jupiter's wearing a striped shirt. You'll get those kinds of details. You get rings when you look at Saturn. Mm-hmm. Venus, you're really not going to get details, but you're going to get the phases, which is really cool to see on a planet instead of just our moon.
Not only that, if you keep watching it, so if you had been watching it like back in January, you would have seen Venus would have been almost full and very small. As you've been watching it over the last few weeks and months, it's been going more to getting smaller. So going from gibbous Venus to half Venus, and it's going toward crescent Venus. It's getting bigger because it's coming around the sun, and it's going to be passing in between the Earth and the sun. So as it heads toward that point where it's close to passing in between, we see a smaller and smaller crescent. Sorry, we see less and less of Venus lit, but the planet is physically closer to us, and so it will physically look bigger through your binoculars or your small telescope. And that is really fun to actually see the movement of a planet through the sky.
Yeah. That's one of the things people really like when you show them. When we're doing solar observing at the Adler or looking at other planets, is people look. And then they ask a question, and then they look a minute later, and it's almost out of view. Mm-hmm. And that's some people get a little thrill. I don't know. I got a thrill out of that the first time I was tracking Jupiter in my telescope. That it moved. It's I knew what I was looking at, but still it was like no, that's real. That's not that's not a computer generated image. That's real. It flew by. It just flew by, or we flew by, or both, whichever way you want to. Keeps turning. It's annoying that way. It's not helpful. So Venus. If you live east of O'Hare, Venus, like I do, you will look up and see Venus, and you will think it's an airplane going near the airport, and then you keep looking at it and you realize it's in the same location. That's how I identify. That's my non-scientific way of identifying Venus, is the one that you think is an airplane until you realize it's not moving anywhere.
Right, so and Venus is one of the objects in the sky most often mistaken for a UFO.
Oh, that's good. So like one of the things this guy came in on over my shoulder right here. There you go. Mm-hmm. So let's see. talked about spring night sky. I have off to the side here. I have a list of questions people gave me, so I'm reading this very fancy handwritten list. So we talked about that. So you mentioned to me about, I actually hadn't heard anything about it, but you mentioned to me about a comet that's kind of floating around. Is that one kind of not turning out to be much?
Well, we're going to see. It's actually kind of cool.
Or we're not going to see.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. It's called Comet Atlas, and it's a comet that could be a fragment of a comet, the Great Comet of 1843. So that comet was called a sun grazer, meaning it came within a decent distance of the sun, like fairly close. But as it got closer to the sun, it fragmented. And this particular one, it seems to have a very similar orbit as that comet. And we know that comet came apart in some pieces. This may be one of those pieces. Okay. And it was starting to get really bright. I got a picture of it a couple weeks ago. And we were starting to get a little, well, we don't totally let ourselves get excited over comets because comets are so often disappointing. Yeah. But we started to say, hey, well, maybe this thing could get kind of bright. Well, in the last few days, the pictures that have been taken, it has decreased in brightness, and the area that the comet takes up in the picture has seemed to elongate, meaning it may already have fragmented into at least a couple different pieces. And those pieces, as we can't resolve them individually yet, but as they start to come apart, it makes the comet look more oblong shaped. Sure. So it's been decreasing in brightness because we don't have it's physically smaller now, and yeah. And so we're going to keep an eye on it, but we don't know if it's going to be bright. Who knows? Maybe those two.
When is Halley's back? Because you can always count on Halley's.
I hate to say it, 2061. 2061.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Set a calendar on that.
Yeah. So, yeah, but Comet Atlas, if you look up the actual name of it, Atlas is sort of, I think it's the name of the telescope that found it. It's not the name of a person. Okay. A lot of times, more often these days, comets are found by telescope arrays or telescope surveys and not individual people. Although occasionally they are found by people. And if a person finds it, it's named after them. But this one, its name is the letter C / 2019 space, the letter Y4. So if you look for comet C / 2019 space Y4 parentheses Atlas, that's the comet we're talking about. So we have no idea what it's going to do, but it's going to pass fairly close as far as the solar system goes, fairly close to the sun, so inside the orbit of Mercury. So we're going to keep an eye on it, see what it does.
Yeah. So I don't remember when it was. I just remember it was brutally cold. So I'm going to guess it was January of last year. We had that lunar eclipse, which turned the moon a very, very cool red color. And talk about things you don't need a telescope or binoculars for. I mean, I looked at it with a telescope and binoculars because I set the things up and I did it. But I looked at them through my telescope and my binoculars once. And then I just looked at it with my own eyes. It was better almost in the wider context of the sky to see it. Are we going to get another? Do we have another one of those this year here in the Chicago area? No, unfortunately.
No. There is there are a couple different kinds of lunar eclipses. There's that total kind where the moon totally passes into the shadow cast by the Earth into space. That's where you see the moon turn kind of red or gray. That's a total. We're not getting one of those. You can sometimes have the moon partly pass into that really dark shadow. That's called a partial eclipse. We're not getting one of those either. The moon's shadow, or the Earth's shadow, actually has two areas. One of them is the darker center area and a lighter area around that. The darker area shadow is called the penumbra, and the lighter part on the outside the darker part is called the umbra. The lighter part on the outside is called the penumbra. We're getting a penumbral lunar eclipse on, I want to say it's July 3rd/4th. But what that means is, unless you know the eclipse is happening, you'd have a pretty tough time knowing, just glancing up at the full moon, that you might say to yourself, oh, it looks slightly more tan than normal.
Right.
But if you don't know it's happening, again, you'd have a tough time really going,
Yeah.
oh, right, penumbral eclipse.
Yeah.
It's still cool to look for, but I believe that's the only lunar-related eclipse we get this year.
Okay. Are there, so the summer, so right now when we're talking about what to look at in the sky, we mentioned Venus, we mentioned Orion to the southwest, if you got a view that way. And the moon, obviously, in its cycle as you get. We didn't mention a whole lot of planets, so people, unless you're going to stay up, we talked about, if you're up at 4:30 in the morning, like the app happened to be showing, good grouping of a lot of really cool planets. When you get those at a decent hour, that's more of a summer thing, late kind of midsummer, when you're going to get those, before midnight, before 11 o'clock.
So this year, the
Around here.
past few years, the planets Jupiter and Saturn have been more summertime objects. They're moving toward being fall objects. So
Okay.
we move around the sun, they move around the sun, they move around the sun more slowly than we do. And so over the last few years, they've slowly been shifting the time period when we see them to later in the summer. So Jupiter and Saturn this year are going to be, as you see them in the sky, they're going to be fairly close together because they're in the same, from Earth, they're in the same direction. Saturn is 500 million miles farther out, so they're not physically close together, but they appear to be close together. And so starting in like August, September, October, November, that's when Jupiter and Saturn are going to be primo fantastic and really easy to see because they're bright, they're big, they're reflective, and they're going to be relatively close together. And if you're still not sure you're looking at a planet versus a star, remember this: planets don't twinkle, stars do. And that just is something to help you find if something is a planet or a star, if you don't have one of the apps with you. So
that was the way I knew I had found. When was it? It was a couple of years ago. I tried to look for Neptune on my back porch, which is not. That's not going to be an easy target. An easy target would be one you can see with your eye and then point the telescope at it.
Yeah.
This is not that target, but for whatever reason, I just decided, you know what? I want to see if I can. I want to get the complete score. I want to see if I can hit all the planets here, and get them. And I found it, but the only reason I knew I had found it was because I had a field of view, and it was the only thing in there that looked like a marble as opposed to a twinkle. It just it didn't look like it was glowing like the other things. So by comparison, I knew I had found something, but I stopped looking at it a minute later because it wasn't anything to look at.
And when Mark says marble, he's not meaning like like an extraordinarily tiny
it's not
thing.
glowing. It wasn't glowing. It just looked like it had a solid edge, but it was a dot.
A slightly bluish tinge to it as well. So, but that's how William Herschel, when he discovered the planet Uranus, how he knew that it wasn't a star. He magnified it. So you change the eyepiece of your telescope, you change the magnification, and it was a little disk. Now, he didn't know he discovered a planet. He thought he discovered a comet. And he had some of his other astronomer friends going, hey, Bill, you may have found a planet there. You may want to go check that. So turns out, yes, he did. He wanted to name it after King George III. So if it were up to William Herschel, we would have been calling the planet Uranus Georgium Sidus, George's star.
They named it the next best thing.
Yeah.
Thankfully for all educators and teachers, they named it what they did.
Exactly. And 10-year-old boys everywhere.
Yes.
And notice I'm
Oh,
saying
fine.
yeah,
It goes any age.
yeah, that's
Doesn't really matter.
true. That's true. Now, Neptune was found because they knew something was gravitationally pulling on Uranus. Its orbit wasn't quite matching up with if there had been nothing else out there. And basically, they said, well, mathematically, there should be something over here. And they pointed their telescope, and boom, there it was. So,
Well, and that's the same way they're trying to figure out with this search for a new, sorry, Pluto fans, a new Planet Nine out there somewhere distant in the solar system. There's several astronomers have this idea that they believe they are getting closer every time they look and don't find it in one patch of sky. They look at another one, finding another planet, part of our solar system, that is, they believe, is very large, but very far. And they're just doing that based on the way other objects are being pulled and pushed around. They don't have no one saw it. There's no visual, but they're just doing the math, basically.
yeah, there is a small chance that various objects, a few objects out far in our solar system, orbit the way they do just purely by chance. But that's a small percentage. The percentage, or the probability is greater that something is out there gravitationally tugging on these things to make them orbit the way they do. And the hard part is they're trying to find this thing. And if it's Neptune sized, great. But we're talking about something that could have several tens of thousands of years of an orbit.
Right.
Pluto, on the other hand, has a 249-year orbit. So this thing would be really far, and so it'd be very dark and very hard to find. So it is your proverbial needle in a haystack to try to find it.
Yeah. I meant to mention this earlier, and we moved on topics, but I'm gonna go back, just revert back to when we're talking about telescopes themselves and using telescopes and tips about using them, because there's a couple tips. There's a million tips for using telescopes. I mean, we could have spent an entire hour just talking about best practices for using your telescope.
There you go. I think we just discovered
another one. We got
version
another one.
2.0. So
yeah. So
I have 3 of the Adler's small telescopes in my dining room as we speak. So if you wanted to do one on telescopes at some point,
we can line that up. So I'm hoping that someone watching this would decide they want to go out and look at some things, and as long as the moon is out, at the moment, if they've got a clear sky, that they will be eager and excited and want to go and do it. And then they grab their telescope that they maybe aren't used to using. They go outside and they have trouble finding something. And we talked about apps, we talked about all that stuff. But in the end, you're going to look at something with your app, and then you're going to try to find it with your telescope. And there are, again, a million tips, but I want to bring up 2 tips, and then I want to know if you had other ones. These are the ones that I tend to run into the most when I talk to people at telescope events or when I'm at the Adler. The conversations that come up the most with guests is one. This is the simplest one. Is people are trying to look with an eyepiece that's too powerful. So we talked about it briefly earlier. Michelle talked about having a wide view versus having this straw, looking through a straw at the night sky kind of view. And you want to have a wider view. So there's going to be a millimeter number on your eyepieces. And if you're opening up your kit or whatever telescope you bought sent you 1 or 2 eyepieces, look at them. One of them is, if it's a low number, like an 8 or a 10 or a 12, that's powerful. That's a strong telescope. You're a strong eyepiece. You're going to look at a very, very, very small portion of the sky. If it's the numbers in the 20s or the 30s or the 40s, that's giving you a wide field of view, and that's what you want. So one of the first things I notice people do, they're like, well, I think it's a 10 millimeter eyepiece. It's like, don't use that. Don't use that. That's for very specific things, and it's wonderful that you have it. But when I look at the moon, I'm looking with a 30 something or a 40 something, or if I want to look at craters, maybe I power it up. But the planets and things like that, in the teens, the 20s, deep sky objects, 40s. So have the right number. The other is the finder. And I would like Michelle to talk a little bit about finder scopes, because a lot of people, maybe they were included and they attached them because the instructions said to attach them, but the instructions didn't say what to do with it. They just said where to click the finder scope on. So maybe Michelle can talk about finder scopes, because that to me is the number one tool. If a telescope doesn't have a finder scope on it, I don't care what app you have, I'm lost. If I have a battery power finder scope, and if the battery dies and I don't have that battery, I stop looking for the night because I'm out of luck.
Yeah. So a finder scope is basically, there's two types that you'll find with telescopes these days. One is actually a little teeny tiny telescope that rides piggyback on the bigger telescope. Another one is called a red dot finder. And what that is some cars these days have, when you start up the car, like my Mazda does this, you start up the car and this little piece of glass pops up in front of me, and it shows me I can drive, and I can just look down a little bit and see the speed of the car. Or
Right.
if I'm having the car navigate, then it'll show like direction arrows and the direction I'm going to turn, or which lane I need to be in, or whatever. And so it's called a heads up display. And so it's basically an image is projected onto this little piece of glass, and then I can see that, and I don't have to keep looking down. The red dot finder kind of works the same way. It's this little tube that has a piece of glass, and it projects, the little tube has a battery in it and projects this little red light onto this piece of glass. And if you have the dot lined up with your telescope, then you can point your telescope, and the red dot, if you look through it and you point the red dot in the direction that you want to go, if you're moving the telescope so you can point that red dot in there, then hopefully what you want to look at is in view. I realize I probably just confused the heck out of people by saying that, but I'll say it another way. The little teeny tiny telescope that rides piggyback on the big one, so if it's that kind of a finder scope, a lot of times they'll have crosshairs on the inside when you look in. And the very first thing I tell people when you take your telescope out, every single time, you need to align your finder scope with the big telescope, because just attaching it doesn't mean it's lined up. And so you attach it, and immediately you need to do this when you take the telescope out, when maybe if it's still a little bit light out and you can see something far off in the distance.
On the ground.
On the
That's
ground.
not moving
It's not
relative to
moving.
you.
Yes,
Right.
a tree, a light, a something as far away as you possibly can get it. Because the closer something is, then you've got a little bit of deviation between what the finder is looking at and what your telescope is looking at, and they won't be looking at the same thing.
The center of that tree, or the left side of that tree, or the right side of that tree.
Right,
So exactly. You want something a little farther away.
Right, something you can identify. So it can't be any tree. You have to be able to pick out the tree. So you need to point your telescope first at the tree. And so focus it, make sure you can identify which tree it is and which part of the tree you're looking at. Then look through your finder, and your finder comes with little knobs on it, and one knob will move your finder up and down, and the other one will move your finder right and left. And you make it so the center of those crosshairs that you're looking at lines up with whatever the telescope is looking at.
Right.
Boom, you're lined up. You're ready to go. And if you're out for a really long time, you may have to go back and do that again, because the temperature changes at night might affect the movement of those little screws and stuff. And so you might have to go back and recheck maybe after an hour or 2 or 3. So it's just something to keep in mind. Now, the red dot finder, it's kind of the same thing. There's little knobs on the red dot finder that you find what you want to look at through the telescope. Then you turn your red dot finder on, and you project the little red dot, and you make it so you turn the little knobs. And so one knob will turn it'll move the position of the red dot side to side, and the other one will move the red dot up and down. So just make sure that you've got it turned on enough so you can look through that little piece of glass and see the red dot, and you can see whatever it is that you're supposed to be lined up on off in the distance. And don't forget to turn your red dot finder off. I've talked to so many people that they accidentally leave it on, and these things are just powered by little watch batteries. And
the little round annoying ones that
yeah,
you never have in the house. Yeah.
right. And you always, like, for your garage door opener, you always need two, and you always have one. And
And that's not going to make it go up and not come back down. You actually
yeah,
need both to get it to.
so anyway, but yeah, you absolutely have to line up your finder scope every time you use your telescope. And using too powerful of an eyepiece at first, power does not always equate with success. And so you need to make sure that you can find what you want first, and then switch out your eyepiece and see what you got.
Think of about like I remember explaining to someone once about thinking about reading a book, and if you hold the book right up to your eyes, you've magnified the book. You've eaten up your entire field of vision with the book, and you held it right up to your eyes. Can you actually bring the words into focus? You're not going to be able to bring them into focus. You need to back the book up.
Yeah.
And back the book up. And at some point, you're going to realize, okay, this is the right distance. This is where I can actually see the words, read the words. They're all clear. It's perfect for my eyes. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing with the tele. You say, well, I want to look at that with the most power I can. Well, great, but you're not going to bring it into focus. You're not going to be able to even tell what it is. It's just going to be a big Jupiter's. If I looked at Jupiter with my telescope with a 6 millimeter eyepiece, which I have, it's just going to be a big blurry ball that isn't going to look like anything. But if I look at it with a 32, you're going to see that it looks like it's wearing a striped shirt, and you can see the moons around it. So yeah, power. That was one of the early mistakes I made with a telescope was, boom, this is the most powerful eyepiece. This is the one I'm using. The other early mistake I made with a telescope was when I came to the Adler, and Michelle was teaching me how to use the Adler's telescopes. And she had this big, long tube reflector, and I hadn't used one like that before. And on a reflector, this kind of tube reflector, the eyepiece is near the front because the light comes in, it bounces off the back and goes to the front. Well, I had been using refractors, which have the eyepiece in the back, which makes logical sense to most people who aren't used to this, as you look through the back of the telescope. So she set up the telescope for us all to learn how to use the Adler specific telescopes, and I promptly squatted down and tried to look right through the back of it. Mm-hmm. And guests do that all the time, and they feel bad about it. I say, no, I did that too.
Everybody does it. Everybody
you always try to look at the back of the telescope.
Yeah, you think of telescope, and you think of the big long tube with the lens at the front, and you put your eye at the back, and that's what we all think of when we think of a telescope. But there are other configurations to mirrors and other things that are almost as old as the refractor telescope. In fact, the reflector was first put together successfully by Isaac Newton.
In 16 something or something like that.
Yeah, 1668. And the physics works. We have other configurations.
Didn't change it. Yeah, I got other configurations, improve the optics, use computers.
Exactly.
But it's his idea still. It's still
exactly.
the same thing.
And so but that's the one that's a kind of a telescope you don't expect to look near the front. You're like, but wait a minute, how does this work? I guess another mistake I see people make, or before they want to buy a telescope, they want one with all the bells and the whistles and the computers and the tracking mount and all that. And it goes back to what I said before, is if you haven't learned your sky, a telescope isn't going to make it any easier for you to find stuff, because
it's going to make it harder.
It's going to make it harder. And a lot of times, several of these telescopes nowadays, you have to either tell the telescope which star you're looking at, or you have to confirm that the telescope is actually looking at the correct star. It'll identify it, but you need to look through the eyepiece and you go, oh wait, I don't know what this one is supposed to look like.
It's a star. I don't know which one it is.
But which one is it? And so you still have to know your sky. Yeah. And so that's where I say, don't buy the bells and the whistles and the computers, the whatever. Learn first and then work your way up. And you will find, as I'm sure Mark has found, that you get a telescope and you go, oh, wait, I want a bigger one. We call it Aperture Fever.
Yes.
And it happens to everybody.
Yeah. But I still go and just, I mean, I got the app, I have the computerized telescope that will find things for me. It's pretty good at it. Sometimes it misses, and usually it's my fault. It's user error. What did Hal say from 2001? We've seen this thing before, and it's always due to human error. I'm sure the computer in the telescope is fine. I messed up something in configuration. It's a whole nother thing to learn. And so I have a really good app that I paid for, and I have a great telescope, and it'll use the computer, and it's wonderful. But I still go out there and star hop with my own eyes. I still go out there and go, okay, so if that's Sirius, then over here that would be that. Okay, so that means that that's Betelgeuse, which means I found Orion, which means that down there would be the Belt. Okay, so that would mean that that's Rigel. And I still move my way across the sky with the few stars you can see at night, even if just for practice, just to find things quicker. I have all of the tools you would expect to have as just a home amateur astronomer, and I choose not to use them a lot of times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sometimes your eyes and something simple is a great way to go. And Mark mentioned a term, star hop, and what that basically means is you use the configuration of brighter things to find the dimmer things. Yeah. So, for example, in the constellation Lyra the Harp, there is a really dim little round thing called a planetary nebula. Again, nebula, fuzzy thing. Planetary has nothing to do with planets. Someone saw one of these things and said, "Oh, round, like a planet," and the name stuck. And we never changed the name because we love confusing you in astronomy. Yeah. But anyway, to try to find that fuzzy thing, if you were to just wanting to point your telescope to try to find it, you won't find it. But if you star hop in between, you start from the top of Lyra and you go down to the 4 stars and you go in between these two, boom, there it is. And so I know that won't make any sense if you don't know what that constellation looks like. Just suffice it to say, you use the brighter stars in the constellation to find this really dim thing that you can't just look up in the sky and go, there it is. And so that makes it a lot easier to find.
Well, and I don't trust my telescope because it hasn't found it yet. I don't trust my telescope to find Andromeda for me the few times I've tried to look at Andromeda. Plus, my telescope's not great to look at Andromeda because I don't have a good eyepiece that's going to give me great wide field. It just looks like a fuzzy thing through my telescope. It doesn't look like much.
Yeah, and actually, it will always look like a fuzzy thing.
Because, it always looks like a fuzzy thing.
Yeah, it's... The Andromeda Galaxy, if you could actually see all of it, it's 6 times wider than the full moon in the sky. It's huge.
So it's not going to resolve into what you're seeing pictures of online. But when I decide I want to test myself and actually look at something different, I looked at the moon a bunch or I looked at Jupiter a bunch. I want to look at something different. I'm going to find that fuzzy Andromeda. I don't use my telescope to find it. And I'm out of practice because I haven't done it. It's not in a good season to look at it for me. So I haven't looked at it for probably a year. So I mentioned how a year goes by and I forget what all these constellations and stars are named. But I use the handle of something and I'm looking at one constellation and I follow stars out. I count out. It's the...
You use the constellation of Pegasus, the square.
Yes, I use the square and I go off of the square. I feel like it's the tail.
Andromeda.
It kind of hooks off. So I count like 1, 2, 3 stars out, and then I go up to one, and then I go up again, and then that same gap is supposed to be where Andromeda is. I don't let my telescope do that. I just do it with my eye.
Yeah. Another way to do it. Another way to do it is it's quite satisfying.
You feel really smart when you do it.
You do.
I found that myself.
The W of Cassiopeia.
Yeah, points to it, right?
Yeah, this side, this point. Yeah. This point, wait a minute. Is that right? No, this point.
There you go.
I'm trying to do it from your direction. It's this one.
Yeah, it's like a telescope.
Yeah. So it points to it, down toward Andromeda. So yeah. Anyway. Yeah. Again, won't make any sense until you look at a star map.
But a couple of you are thinking of doing that, or maybe you've tried that before and thought, I want to go look at Andromeda. If there's one of you who's tried to do that, there's I don't use my computer on my telescope to use it. I don't use my app to do it. I star hop. Star hop works every time.
Yeah.
Computer might not work. My telescope might be slow. I might not have programmed it right that night. My finder might be off. But but I can. It's in the same spot in the sky, so I can just look and
Yeah.
find it. So
Yeah.
you can find that with anything.
So
Yeah.
satisfying.
Yep. So we've kept you for a while here. We're over an hour. So I wasn't sure if there's anything else that you wanted to make sure we talked about. Otherwise, I was going to mention that obviously no one can go to the Adler right now, but I would assume that they would still like it if people became members, so you can go when it is open. So
Absolutely.
I'll set you up for that.
Yeah, we love our members. We really do. Can't thank them enough for supporting the Adler. And we've had people the last few weeks definitely re-upping their memberships, and even just people out of the blue just donating money to us. And we're so grateful to everyone who has supported us through this. And we absolutely can have folks come to our website if you're a parent and you're trying to keep kids entertained at home and you go, oh my gosh, they have to learn some astronomy stuff. Well, we have some digital resources on our website, and you'll see those linked off of the homepage.
Right.
If you go to our homepage, www.adlerplanetarium.org, and you scroll down a little bit, you'll see our learning at home resources. And one of the best things that the Adler is involved in is Zooniverse,
Yes.
Zooniverse,
Yes.
zooniverse.org. And this is a bunch of over 1 million citizen scientists around the world who are helping research scientists go through data in various ways.
Yeah.
And these are real, honest to goodness research projects that we just need lots of eyeballs and brains on these research projects and contribute to the data gathering or the data crunching or what have you. Each of these Zooniverse projects is different. They're not all related to astronomy.
Yeah.
Some are history, some are art, some are what have you. Some are just pure transcription because we've got records that are written down and someone needs to go and transcribe these so they could be searchable in databases and stuff. And so zooniverse.org is something that I'm just pointing everybody to these days because you can get your kids, your family, adults, everybody involved in these projects, and there's something there literally for everybody. And it's it's really satisfying because you are participating in a research project that they even give you access to some of the data directly. There have been people who have gone through these databases of astronomical images, and they have found new objects that we didn't know about before. We didn't know very much about them before. These are new examples of them. There have been people who have participated in one of these research projects called Planet Hunters. They have found planets around other stars. These are the people combing through the data, vast amounts of data, to try to find evidence of planets around other stars, and they found it. And this is all real, and so we definitely need folks helping out. And there have been even more people in the last month who have gone on the Zooniverse.org website to go help out and find some
Good.
and do some
That's
investigations. So
Yeah, it's a
it's been
good it's a good group. I know they had a book they put together. I got to help them with that a little bit, and just the diversity of the projects, just
right,
covering
right,
everything. There's an interest in there. There's a project in there that's gonna speak to you. It's a very
yeah.
very cool group.
And keep an eye on our social media feeds. We are at Adler Planet on Twitter and Instagram, and we are Adler Planetarium on Facebook.
Okay.
And so if we've got something cool to look at in the sky, we post stuff several times a month. Some simple stuff to help people start to learn where what the moon phases are, what some bright stars are, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Um, and then also to get people to even participate even a little more, we started doing an online telescope observing. We did an online star party for the very first time last week, and so I mentioned earlier that we're gonna do that again. We don't have the schedule yet, but we're gonna do that again, and we're gonna keep doing it because boy, was it fun.
Yeah. People were
And
able to ask a lot of questions, and
yeah,
it was really
yeah,
good.
it's off of our YouTube channel, and so people are able to type questions live. One of my colleagues, an astronomer, was answering questions live, and we were looking at craters on the moon, and it was just so much fun, and it was great to get my eyeballs back on the telescope
It
again.
was funny because I tuned into that, and the astronomer who was helping you, his name's Mark, and at some point somebody asked a very complicated question about the moon, and you saw the question and you said, "Oh, that's a perfect question. I think we'll let Mark answer that." And I got terrified for a moment because I'm like, I absolutely cannot answer that question. I don't have the faintest idea. Can I phone a friend? I mean, that's terrible. And then I realized, they've got the other. Okay, they got the smart mark on here. Good. All right, great. It's wonderful. But I was really scared. That I was like, why is she tossing this to me? This is not a good idea. So yeah,
That was a lot of fun. And so keep an eye on our social media feeds for stuff like that. We've got some more things that we're going to be rolling out digitally over the next few weeks. So again, social media is the best way to keep up
yep.
with what we have. We've got new stuff up there every day, and just something to bring us all back to the situation that we're in right now. I learned just how amazing my colleagues are today. There was a news story posted on one of the local radio stations' websites. So this is actual news that we have several 3D printers, and one of my colleagues has repurposed the Adler's 3D printers and our supply of the plasticky stuff that goes into the 3D printers. We're using those to create face shields for first responders on the south and west sides of Chicago.
That's a really
And then,
cool project.
yeah, it's really cool. And so they're able to crank out about 40 of those a day. And
Wow,
then, yeah, it's not
that's
bad, right?
I don't know what number I would have guessed, but I'm not sure I would have guessed that.
No, I would have thought it'd
Yeah,
been less than that. I've seen these 3D printers work,
they
and
can take all
they
day depending on what you're
are
printing.
quick. And so yeah,
Yeah,
this is really cranking them out. And
yeah.
then we have a bunch of computers that are all hooked together that we normally use for creating our planetarium shows. And so they have given researchers access to the computing power of those collected computers, and they are mapping the proteins on the COVID-19 virus. And hopefully, and I hope I just said that science right. Forgive me if I just messed it up, but they're
When I finish doing something like this or some event somewhere or hours at the Adler doing volunteer stuff, and it's usually my primary thought on my drive home. It's just I hope I did
like,
that
what did I
science
just
right.
get wrong?
Did I
Yeah.
tell what did I tell some kid that's not true today?
And so, yeah, they're hopefully the researchers are able to use this information to help create vaccines and to help us all. So we may not be able to use our computers right now to create a planetarium show, so we're putting them to good use. So
Yeah, that's good.
I'm
So
so proud of my colleagues for doing stuff
yeah,
like that.
that's very neat. So one last thing as we finish up here, we'll just do the fine print things as we finish. So I love all of the museums in Chicago, and we're going to get back to all of them at some point. We're going to be able to go with all of them. They're all world class in their own field. Every museum in the city is a world class museum in the topic that it is in. Obviously, I'm a little bit biased as to the one that I tend to go to the most, but I will say this: the Adler Planetarium is the one that you get to take home with you because the sky is above you the moment you step out the doors of the planetarium. The four walls and the ceiling cannot contain what you're going to learn from a planetarium. You're going to get to learn about the night sky, and then you're going to go outside, and it's going to be the night sky.
It's the sky we all
you're
share.
home now, and you're not able to do the planetarium part, but you're still able to do the sky part. And it would seem to me that if anyone are like me, you're kind of a little bored at some point with just being at home. So go outside and look
Safely.
safely.
Do not
No one
congregate.
around. Yes,
Do not
don't go
target.
in groups. That's why I usually do this once a month in a crowd in public. We're not doing it here. That's why this is called Confined Space. So
Right.
we're stuck inside. So that's what I love about going to the Adler. I will have more videos like this. A week and a half or so ago, I had someone from NASA on who was talking about the search for life. Dr. Morgan Cable. I hope you watched that. If you didn't watch that, and this is the first one of these you're watching, it is on the Facebook page. It's posted there. You can go watch it whenever. This will be posted to the page as well. So if you know someone who would like it, or we were talking too fast during any of that telescope instructional stuff, it'll be posted to Facebook. Go back and watch it.
Or you would like to do one on telescopes, and if you want me to join in, I'd be happy to do it. Like I said, I've got 3 different ones.
Get a couple set up so we can get a little hands-on with them and exhibit them.
I can set it up right here. I've got the camera right there.
We can do
that. Not a problem. We can do a telescope tutorial. So
we should do that. So the bottom line is going to be there's 2 I've done 2 of these now. I like the first one so much that I had a graphic made for it, just because I have free time. So I had someone make a graphic for me. Not enough free time to make the graphic, but I had enough free time to ask someone to make a graphic for me. And I wanted to tell that if you like the graphic thing he does, I want to make sure you know who he is. I try to link. He's going to have a website at some point. I don't believe he does just yet. So for those of you looking at it, and those of you who have Twitter, that's how you find the guy who did the little Confined Space graphic. There's a microphone behind it. You'll see when we're done here. I'm going to put another little screen up here that'll show that graphic clearer. So if you're into the graphic thing, or if you have need for one, he did a very cool job for me, and he did it very quickly. So
I love
that's his Twitter.
Saturn. I love the Saturn that goes.
You can see the Saturn. Yeah. So yeah, when we're done here, we're gonna disappear. You're gonna see our cool faces disappear, and then this other thing's gonna pop up, and hopefully you'll see the little Saturn that Michelle's talking about. So I'll pop that up. But I wanted to give him the little. That's his Twitter. I'm sure he's gonna have a website soon, I am told, or I'm not sure if it was just down at the moment, but you know how technical things work. So he will have one. But that in the meantime, that's his Twitter. So if you're into the graphic thing, that is him. Otherwise, thank you, Michelle, for coming on and spending almost like an hour and a half with us. That is very cool. And again, if you liked it, you'll be able to find it posted to Facebook. I did start a YouTube thing the other day, like a channel. So I'm very new to that. So I don't even really know how to promote that. But I posted them there too. So if you know someone who isn't into Facebook or is morally opposed to Facebook, I get that. You can find it there as well on the YouTube channel under my name. So it'll be video 2 of that. So thanks everyone for watching. Keep your eye on that Facebook page as I advertise more things. Maybe you'll see Michelle again with some telescopes next time, and we'll do a little hands-on stuff to really get into it. Bring your telescopes into the room, and we'll show you how things kind of click together. The telescopes come in different shapes and sizes, but some of the principles of them are rather universal in how things go together and how you use them. So even if you have a telescope that doesn't look like one of the ones that we might show you, it probably works in a very similar way, and we can help you with it so you can have something to do at night. So
it's not just a coat hanger in the side of the room there.
Yes,
so
you could actually use it, get some money out of it for what the money you paid for it. So all right, well, thanks everyone for watching, and thank you again, Michelle, and stay safe, everybody, and we will see you the next time, I hope.
Bye.